Hello everyone, and welcome to week 8 of English 121. This week, we're going to be switching to the genre of poetry. I'd like you to begin by just watching this lecture. Then I'd like you to read chapter 13, reading a poem that's found on pages 673 to 686. We're going to do a close reading exercise of One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The poem is found on page 985, and you're going to watch a film clip of from In My Shoes. It's a film that has Carmen Diaz in it, and there's a clip of her reading that poem aloud and giving interpretation of it. I'd like you to read the poem yourself and also watch a film clip. For our conversation this week, you're going to find a poem and introduce it to the class, and there's some selected poems to choose from. Then for your week 8 reflection journal, you're going to practice close reading One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. So what is poetry? I'd love for you to begin by reading a poem video on the interactive text. It gives you a really great introduction to how to read a poem. And don't try to find out the answer to this question. So don't try to figure out what poetry is. Instead, I want you to study the poems and let them grow in your mind after each reading. For the next few weeks, we're going to be learning the study of poetry, how to look at a poem closely. I'm going to introduce vocabulary to you that you can use to express what the poem means, and offer a plethora of amazing poems to read, for you to read, and for you to understand. So how do you go about reading a poem? You start off by reading a poem closely. That means you're going to read it more than once. I know some of you experienced this when we were reading short stories, that you had to really dive in there. You had to not only read the story once or twice, you had to reread sections of it to really get the meaning. Poetry is very, very small, and even though it's small, it's like concentrated orange juice. It's got so much sweetness, it's got so much power to it, that you have to read it slowly and really understand each layer that is packed into it. You want to go through it line by line. You want to look up any words that you don't know. That's really important. Try to figure out which words are important. Are there words that are repeated? Are there words at the beginning or the end of a line? You want to, after you read the poem and you kind of have an idea of it, go ahead and paraphrase it in your mind. That means restate it in your own words, what the poem means. You want to state the poem's literal meaning and reread it to make sure that you haven't missed anything important. So that's how you read a poem when you go about just trying to understand it. There's two real main types of poems. There's lyric poetry, and then there's narrative poetry. Lyric poetry is originally a lyric poem was a poem that was sung to the music of a lyre. So if you see that picture above, that's Sappho, one of our earliest lyric poets. And she would perform her poetry at huge halls of, at parties, like at weddings. She would get up there and perform her poetry. Instead of having a live band, you'd have a live poet. Now, we use the term lyric as a short poem to define a short poem that expresses thoughts and feelings of a single speaker. So an example of a lyric poem would be the poem One Art, which we're reading this week, and also the poem I'm going to read to you right now. It's called The Lake Isle of Innisfree, and this is by William Butler Yeats. This poem was written in 1892, and William Butler Yeats wrote it when he was very far away from his home. He was in England, and he was from Ireland, and he was missing his home a great deal. He was in London, in a city, and so you see a reference to his longing for his home in the country. The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the veils of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray. I hear it in the deep heart's core. So the poem itself is on page 675, and in the book there is a paraphrase of the poem that you can look at, and it sounds very, it sounds like a very simple poem, but there's lots of words in it that we might not understand, like wattles and glade and linnet, right? So you have to look up these words, right? What is a linnet? It's a type of bird, right? But you need to know that it's like a sparrow. And if you go to really paraphrase it, the paraphrase that the book has for us is, I'm going to get up now and go to Innisfree and build a cabin, plant beans, keep bees, and live peacefully by myself amid nature and beautiful light. I want to because I can't forget the sound of that lake water. When I'm in the city, a gray and dingy place, I seem to hear it deep inside me. So that's a paraphrase of this beautiful poem. They don't touch you in the same way, right, that the poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, does if you read it aloud to yourself or if you read it on the page and you really feel like you're getting it. But it's a way for you to make sure that you're getting it, right? So this would be your first step. Once you really understand it, then you go back and read it again to make sure you feel the feelings, the actual emotions of the poem. The other type of poetry is narrative poetry. Narrative poetry is originally it was used to write epic poems, such as Homer's Odyssey or Virgil's Aeneid. The main purpose of narrative poetry is to tell a story, and there's a great example of narrative poetry, and that is Out, Out by Robert Frost, and that's found on page 680. There's also another example of lyric poetry on 677. That's Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays. It's a lovely poem written in 1962. Again, it has a really rich ending that you should really think about. Just like Deep Heart's Core. When you read a poem like that, you really want to think about, what does he mean? What does Yeats mean by Deep Heart's Core? So Robert Frost wrote Out, Out in 1916. And the title of the poem echoes the words of Shakespeare's Macbeth on receiving news that his queen is dead. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's from Macbeth, and that's where the title comes from, Out, Out. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there, those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled as it ran light or had to bear a load, and nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day. I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside them in her apron to tell them, supper! At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leapt out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting. But the hand, the boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all, since he was old enough to know, big boy, doing a man's work, though a child at heart. He saw all spoiled. Don't let them cut off my hand. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was gone already. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath. And then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. So this is a story told to us about a very tragic event, a little boy whose hand gets cut in a saw and who in the end really loses his life, right? We can restate it that way, but the emotion of the story you can't paraphrase, right? You need to know why Robert Frost is telling this story. What emotion is he trying to convey in this narrative story, in this story of an event? If you want more information on the Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats, you can watch the video on the e-text, and that really explains the poem in great detail. It's a really good way to look at a poem, an excellent poem, and William Butler Yeats is thought of as one of the best poets ever to have lived. It really puts it into context, so you can really feel like you're understanding that poem. So we're gonna try our hand at reading poetry. We're gonna start with, if you look in chapter 33, which begins on page. Sorry, I'm getting the page for you. It begins on page, almost there, 1059, I believe. If you look at poems for further reading, and I'd like you to choose one of the poems in this section, just a poem that speaks to you, and I'd like you to offer a close reading of this poem. You're going to begin by reading the poem straight through. Then you're going to read for sense. So you're going to read it slowly. You're going to try to understand every word. You're going to look up any word that you don't know. And then you're going to restate or paraphrase what the poem's about. Finally, I want you to explain why you chose this poem, how and why it spoke to you. Okay, that's what you're going to post in your conversation. As always, your post is due by Friday of this week at 11:59 p.m. You guys are doing a great job with this. And make sure you respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts by the following Monday. Sorry, you've already turned in your fiction writing assignment, so ignore that slide. The next slide is about your reflection journal. So this week you're going to be watching a video clip from the movie In Her Shoes with Carmen Diaz, where Carmen Diaz is reading the poem One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. This poem is found on page 985. I'd like you to have the text in front of you when you are reading the poem. I mean, when you're watching the video, so that you can see the poem in front of you. Then I'd like you to close read. So watch the video. It's pretty short. Then I'd like you to close read the poem yourself. It's on page 985. Use the skills that you've gained this week to write about what the poem is about. Think about what the speaker of the poem has lost. Why does she repeat lines in this poem? What words are repeated? Why do you think they are repeated? How does the poem make you feel, and why do you think it makes you feel this way? All right, that's it for this week, guys. We're just diving into poetry. Next week, we're going to start looking at some of the tools of poetry that poets use to convey the meaning that they'd like to convey. We're going to start by looking at imagery. Imagery is the way you invoke images in a poem, and it's a very important part of poetry. That's it for this week. As always, please stop by my office hours Monday or Wednesday from 12:30 to 3, or set up another time to meet with me if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing you guys online.